Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan. The following is a Skype interview I did with the Switzerland-based David Mapley, who as a director of a Canadian company listed on a European stock exchange, found himself caught up in an international scandal with a New Zealand-registered financial service provider at its centre. So David, if you could just tell me how you first encountered the registered New Zealand financial service provider that was known as London Capital NZ Limited.
Right, I was running a company that was listed on the GXG markets in the UK, and as the company progressed and grew bigger, we needed to appoint a corporate advisor, and the GXG introduced us to Brian Cook and London Capital NZ, that not only had a broking license, which was useful for us because they could conduct executions of shares for interested parties in our company, but they were there to provide us with advice on listing. And through Brian Cook, I got to know the London Capital Group over a year or so, and eventually they asked me to join the board of one of their other GXG companies called Asia Pacific Gold Mining, a Canadian company also listed on the GXG in London, which I was happy to do. I have some mining and resource investment background. APGMI was a very large company, almost £250 million market cap, and I felt I could add some value, so I joined the board of that company.
So when did you realise that Capsule wasn't quite what it seemed, or what it should be?
Right. Well, I met my fellow board members of APGMI, and very solid, good quality people. The CEO was group captain in the Royal Air Force, retired, had worked directly for Margaret Thatcher in developing Middle East relations years earlier. Because of my background in finance, my first job was to put together the audit of the company that was late, and we were now actually, our shares were suspended because we were late in putting together the accounts. Very strange exercise. First of all, we were using an accounting firm in the US for a Canadian company, which made no sense at all, and the actual accountant had disappeared and had left not only our company but 3 or 4 companies already on the GXG in default by basically doing a run-up. London Capital were handling everything of the company. They handled the payments, they handled our bank accounts. We couldn't move without London Capital approving. And I talked to them, said, why are we working with this accountant? They didn't tell me. So I found another accountant in Canada, and we started submitting numbers for the audit process. As I became more familiar with the background, the accounting of the company, I'm looking at a company that's worth less than $500,000. And I'm looking at a $500,000 company, and I'm trying to figure out why on the stock exchange of the GXG in London we have a value of £233 million sterling. And I having already got a company listed on the GXG, I called up the stock exchange and spoke with the CEO. I said, can you tell me what's going on here? What's behind this trade? And I discovered there was only one trade of APGMI shares. One trade done in 2013. And of course, I then discovered the broker was London Capital New Zealand. So I then turned around and went back to London Capital New Zealand, got no answer from Brian Cook. And I asked him and texted him, sent him messages, emails, and shortly thereafter I was asked to go to London to meet with Thomas Shee and Julie Cook, Brian Cook's sister. And apparently my co-directors were asked the same. We go to London, and we're all taken into a room one by one, or separately, which seemed also strange. So we told that Brian Cook had been arrested in Switzerland, taken to Germany, and was helping the authorities with an investigation into some financial matters, and that was it.
And this was last year.
This was June of last year. Yeah.
Now sorry, go on.
I live in Switzerland. I know that for someone to be arrested in Switzerland and extradited to Germany is quite a serious matter.
Now, just, I guess, to put some context around this, I mean, based on your LinkedIn profile, which I looked at earlier, you have about 29 years experience in the financial markets. I mean, you've taken on Goldman Sachs, among others, and worked with the SEC in the US. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you're a guy with a lot of experience and I guess knowledge. So I guess the London Capital people initially obviously seemed legitimate to you, but clearly
Yeah.
turned out not to be. To what extent has the New Zealand link played in this, and how significant has it been?
Well, London Capital could not have pulled off what it had pulled off or has pulled off without the FSP status in New Zealand. They approached the GXG exchange in London and said, we'd like to be a broker. In fact, they had prior to that had some experience with the German stock exchanges, although I believe they weren't a broker to the German stock exchanges. They were doing it through a German house. But they were able to secure a broking license for the GXG in London, which sort of gives them like the PlayStation console where they can do buy and sell on behalf of customers. And the stock exchange doesn't have the capacity or role to check who are the customers behind the broker. They trust the broker. So they're seeing a company that walks in and says, we are from New Zealand, we are regulated to conduct financial business, we'd like a broking license please, and they were awarded it. So what this means is the GXG sees a very respectable jurisdiction, New Zealand, and thinks, well, if a company has a financial services provider regulation in New Zealand, that is good enough for us through our Commonwealth ties to accept that jurisdiction for the purposes of granting a broking license to this reputedly a bona fide company. And they gave London Capital at this point the tool and mechanism to go into serious fraud and a serious price manipulation of stocks.
You've described in a Canadian court document, you've described the London Capital Group as a pump and dump financial group that fraudulently establishes companies for short-term supernormal profiteering from market manipulation and aggressive share selling programs to investors based in countries of weak financial regulation and law enforcement. So what you're basically saying really is the New Zealand connection really enabled all this to happen?
Completely.
Now, you've been in touch with both the Financial Markets Association CEO Rob Everett and the New Zealand Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister Paul Goldsmith about this.
Yeah.
What sort of reception have you had from them?
Mixed bag. I'd say the minister has been sympathetic. As I pushed, which I did, I think he started to realise the enormity of the problem that he was potentially facing. And clearly, I see from recent papers tabled in Parliament, he's asked questions. I mean, he has an ability to reach down and say, is this a business practice that is hurting New Zealand? And it's in his interest, of course, to look at that. And I've had a frank exchange with himself and his parliamentary secretary and explained to him the problem they have with their entity. And I would say, as I started to investigate London Capital, I found cases of other companies who had this New Zealand financial service provider license and had broking access to London. When I talked to the FMA, and I'd have to say I've worked with a lot of regulators around the world, and the US has some steel, but generally you often have people who are paper pushers, not really a seasoned practitioner in the industry, who suddenly find themselves sort of like refereeing a World Cup match and they've never kicked a ball in their life. And the FMA certainly just pushed back and said, thanks very much, but I pushed back on the FMA and said, you have to understand, this is rather important and you need to act. So I've got London Capital that's acting as a broker in London because they're purportedly regulated by you, and they are committing crimes. They're committing financial crimes of the most serious nature. They are essentially taking a two-bit startup and able to simply execute a buy and sell order on the stock exchange with no underlying client and establish a value of £233 million without any underlying trade. And suddenly they're in a position to then walk around Asia selling shares to investors in Asia who believe that a New Zealand broker representing a Canadian company on a London stock exchange is bona fide and has real intrinsic value, as you'd expect from combining a Canada, a New Zealand and a UK jurisdiction into a financial market price. That's what they picked apart. And the FSP process is flawed because you're allowing people to walk into London and say, hey, we're regulating New Zealand, therefore give us a broking license. The FMA's response was like, well, we can't be responsible for what happens outside New Zealand. This license, upon pushing, actually doesn't cover anything in New Zealand. So as I bluntly put it to the FMA, So basically, you're handing driving licenses to people who can go and drive anywhere in the world apart from in New Zealand and cause whatever carnage and crashes, but it's not your remit. You don't care. And that's how I put it back.
Most important thing. Look, just wondering if you can, in terms of London Capital, if you can put some figures on this for us in terms of, estimates of how many investors have been involved, how much money has been involved, and how much money is on the line here or has been lost.
Right. Well, APGMI, Asia Pacific Gold Mining Investments, that I was a former director of, when I started investigating, and at the time the share register had just less than 900 shareholders. Now I have been in contact with them. I've set up various focus groups and forum like on Facebook. I now have direct contact with probably about over 100 shareholders. They have bought shares in the region of prices of £2 down to 20 cents. I know that London Capital sold 18 million shares after they established that false price of £2.33 per share. And remember, London Capital set up, and Thomas Yee, co-founder of the company, with Brian Cook, who's sitting in jail in Stuttgart awaiting trial for market manipulation. Thomas Yee was granted 100 million shares by Brian Cook's sister, who established the company. So he wakes up on the 16th of July 2013, suddenly worth £233 million from previously worth nothing the day before. And he sits there with this huge shareholding and starts peeling off shares. They sold shares in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, India, UAE. They went through Asia selling shares. So I looked into the process as why are they targeting this information base? And what came back to me very quickly was, well, we were shareholders in Virgin Gold, and we were exchanged from Virgin Gold into Asia Gold Mining Asset Company. And then we were exchanged into VG Resources, a mining company listed on the GXG exchange in London. And then that folded, and then we were transferred into APGMI. Okay, right. So I dug into this, and then I came across Virgin Gold Mining Corporation. Now you can look on YouTube. There are videos of gala investor dinners in Bali, in Jakarta, in Manila, in Hong Kong, Singapore. Huge affairs. Pop stars, speeches, glittering ballrooms. And as I got into the group, I discovered that hundreds of thousands of people have become investors in a very large mining scam set up around 2010 from Brian Cook and colleagues here in Switzerland, who had Panamanian banking relationships and created this concept through internet of investing in the gold mining deal of the century. And investors piled in through internet portals run by London Capital. So it was all very faceless, and they were sending money to London Capital's bank account in Poland. And you could buy shares in silver, platinum, gold shares, which gave you entitlements of very high returns every month. You got more returns if you brought your friends in. So they created a pyramid selling scheme based on a total fraud. And as the regulators got wise to them, they closed down the vehicle, said, oh, we had to transfer the company assets into another vehicle. You get entitled through due diligence to get new shares. So poor investors were going off to now a corporate services run by the Orchard brothers, the Orchard father and son team, who were solicitors in London. And they were turning up in Hill Street, Mayfair, causing almost a riot with the police involved, with investors trying to transfer their shares, given all this money they'd put in. Our estimate is they put in between $2 and $4 billion over a number of years into this Virgin Gold scam. And if you look on internet, on YouTube and other fora, you see the scale of the selling operation. It was very large. They had a whole team of actors whose faces appeared on the website, people we traced to modelling agencies in Chatswood, Australia. The names were from name-a-grave, dead people. And they put up a false board of directors. They had Romanian actors. They hired a gentleman, Roland Herney Gusman, who was a Swiss banker, to be the figurehead for a while, who seemed respectable and, a crusty old Swiss. I've invested in resources, who was based in the UK. And it was such a big scam. And eventually the heat got too much. They closed it down, move it. Julie Cook and Brian Cook set up VG Resources, listed on the GXG in London, announces it's going to buy the assets from Virgin Gold, so the price goes up. Then the regulators close it down. So the next thing, they move to New Brunswick, which is a very sort of sleepy province in Canada. They register Asia Pacific Gold Mining Investments with nothing, with no underlying asset. Julie Cook goes in and says, set up this company, give me 100 million shares, thank you. And then they approach, well, Brian Cook approaches various people like myself and the Cunninghams and Philip Carpel and said, can you find us a mining asset? So, well, we had access to a mining asset that was sort of attractive in Ethiopia, and yet we're looking at a website that talks about Indonesia and Mongolia and Asia. I'm saying, why is it called Asia Pacific Gold Mining? And the explanation was, well, yeah, we just thought it was a good name at the time, but okay, let's do Ethiopia. It's only then we realized in time that the significance was they were appealing to and appeasing angry Asian investors who expected to see gold mining done under their very nose, and the fact was it was scam after scam, fraud after fraud. We came in bona fide, but as soon as I, from a financial perspective, saw an audit report that was less than $1 million of value, I'm looking at a market cap and have access to the stock exchange and find out that the share price was totally fictitious. As I started questioning London Capital, that's when they closed ranks. They threw our board of directors out. We filed a lawsuit on behalf of the shareholders, and where we claimed, you guys are just criminal. You are taking companies of peanuts and giving false share prices of very large value. And Berlin Stock Exchange, I've been to meet with the police in Berlin. Thomas G was on the board of 9 companies that were UK based, that Brian Cook and Julie Cook set up. And these companies were, 2 peanuts on a table, Peanuts Inc. Suddenly it's worth $60 million. They're selling shares into Germany. Then the thing gets delisted and deregistered in the space of 1 to 2 years. And they were going through company after company to such an exchange, such an excess that the actually Frankfurt Stock Exchange closed down its first quote board of the stock exchange in December 2012. So there's so much abuse, they closed down a whole section of the stock exchange. So London Capital were quite instrumental in walking around as a bona fide New Zealand regulated entity, getting broking access to markets, and were going off purporting in London to be, a solid regulated company. A solid regulated company doing business, and they were then manipulating prices. And as far as Asian investors were concerned, hey, here's a company in London, broked and advised by a New Zealand entity that's regulated. Seems good enough for us. We'll put money in. And what a company it looks. Such hype going on. Pop stars singing the virtues of virgin gold on our local stage in the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. Big operation. And just a cursory research through internet will show you the scale of what was going on. Virgin gold mining offices in Dubai, in Singapore, and Delhi. I mean, massive.
With obviously with your deep knowledge of what's happened here, and with your understanding now, which I dare say is way more advanced than most New Zealanders of our financial service providers register, what would you like to see New Zealand authorities do, indeed to help you, and what would your advice be to New Zealand authorities in terms of our regulation or lack thereof around financial service providers?
Right. Well, a number of issues that come up which I think are relevant. First of all, you can't give a license to an entity to act offshore and elsewhere without them having a presence in New Zealand. I mean, really, to hand over a driving license to someone who go and drive elsewhere on this planet who's never even driven a car in your own country is kind of irresponsible. And this is certainly the case with London Capital and some of the other entities. So they need to have someone accountable in New Zealand, and I mean accountable by proper staff, that if there's a problem, someone can step in and grab these people, round them up and say, what are you doing? I think that's number one. Number two, the process of financial service provider registration seems at best farcical. London Capital were deregistered, and as I recall, within 1 month they changed the name, same person, same people, same modus operandi, and re-registered. London Capital New Zealand suddenly became Asia Finance Corporation, brackets, doing business as London Capital. So as far as anyone was concerned, London Capital was still in business. and they propagated that simply by reapplying and changing the name. No one was checking what was going on. So they basically deregister a business and the people, the same shareholder, same director, deregister a business that's back and registered within a month. Why don't they have a blacklist? Why aren't these people, when you see a Julie Cook, a Brian Cook, a Thomas G, why are they not on a blacklist? They can never touch New Zealand FSP status again. You know, that to me seems quite bizarre. They're simply, oh, okay, we got thrown out, let's reapply under a different name. And that shows for me very lax controls. And you have not only London Capital, but you have a whole host of other companies that have been creating mayhem in the UK and in the European stock exchanges based on we're from New Zealand, which is a good jurisdiction, therefore give us a broking license. And what was finally clear is that the New Zealand FMA doesn't talk to other exchanges. Upon a lot of pressure, and it almost got nasty with Mr. Everett, he finally said, look, God damn it, these people aren't regulated to be brokers in other countries. And I put that straight over to the GXG, who fell off the chair. So, what? So why is there no international coordination? Because funny enough, New Zealand is part of this planet. While it hands out willy-nilly licenses to go and at large be a James Bond and go around killing markets elsewhere, they have to be responsible and they have to be coordinated. So they have to make sure they are talking to other exchanges and other regulators like the FCA in the UK and the SEC in the US and say, we are granting these licenses, here's our register, these companies have the following powers and they have the following disqualifications. So the UK, when it gets approached by a New Zealand FSP, says, I'm sorry, we can't give you a license. According to your regulator, you're not licensed to actually do broking activities. So the FMA clearly seems to have its head in the sand here, writes up, and I don't know if it charges money for an FMA license or an FSP license, but there seems to be no control, no integration into the worldwide markets because they are truly global, as I've seen with London Capital, and it seems very, very lax. And the fact that you can just keep resubmitting a slight variation of your name every month to get your license renewed also seems farcical.